Echo hated this. He ducked, thinking he'd die as he watched one of the lethal, ricocheting projectiles of the enemy snipers bounce off a wall near him. He breathed out a sigh of relief a moment later when it imploded Boomer's skull instead of his own. The sensation was followed by a wash of shame so intense he nearly stood and offered himself up to death. Instead, his self-loathing grew as he curled up tighter behind the Durasteel containers they had set out as cover. The thick things were holding, mostly, but one never knew when that would change. Worst of all, Echo felt utterly useless, like he was truly a cripple. The first thing he had done when the enemy attack had come was fall back to the last access point, running as fast as he could. He needed to get the lights under control. He needed to make sure they didn't shut down the elevator. Echo had succeeded, but now found himself so far back in the battle that his blaster pistol was all but useless at his range. His cover was also isolated, and the position had clearly been noticed, likely not devastated by heavier weapons thanks to its proximity to the access point in the wall behind him. In normal circumstances, this would have meant switching to his blaster rifle, like Boomer had. The clone grimaced, looking down at his mechanical arm, fitted not with a hand, but a variable access plug. No way to hold the rifle accurately without both hands, not with all these new, horrid body parts to get used to. The unwilling cyborg was basically waiting for death, and couldn't even have the dignity of dying while taking some out himself. Echo spat. "Better to die trying to advance than to die sitting here," he yelled, more to himself than anything or anyone else. He slapped his own face with his good hand and slid his metal legs back underneath his body. Echo began to rise just as the wall of blast shields walked past the bend and into his view, Rex having reorganized some of the rear guard into reinforcements for the battle. Echo quickly dropped back down, waiting until they reached his position and then falling in behind the second advancing rank. He only made it a few steps, however, before he was yanked back out and behind the boxes by Captain Rex himself. Seething fury flashed hot in Echo's chest, spitting as he looked into his own reflection in Rex's helmet. "Rex, you can't stop me from fighting in this battle!" the clone cyborg said, shrugging his hand off. Rex did not relent, however. "I need you for a different kind of fighting, Echo," said the captain. Echo felt like he might burst, clenching his teeth as his eyes looked straight into his captain's visor. "Listen here, Rex. I'm not a damn astromech droid. I'm a soldier. I was bred to fight, not to plug into sockets." Rex grabbed Echo by the front of his armor and shook him, pinning him briefly against the crates. "You were bred to win battles, Echo. You going into this fight won't change much, but this could change everything." Echo glared at his commander. "What could?" he yelled over the din of death all around them. In response, Rex backed off and unslung something from his back. Initially, Echo had taken it to be a missile launcher, but now he could see that it wasn't a Republic weapon at all. It was one of the satellite dish-tipped weapons of the Imperials. "It's locked! We can't make it fire!" Rex yelled. "These weapons are tearing us apart! I bet they'll do the same to the droidmen if we aim them back in their direction!" Echo looked down at the weapon, and then back up at Rex, eyes wide. "Captain, he started to say. "Blasters ain't cutting it, Echo! We have a lift load of these droidmen weapons just sitting behind our lines. More backup is incoming, but I'm aiming to make this competitive before they show up." He shoved the weapon into Echo's arms. "Can you do it?" Echo looked down at it, seeing an access slot that he was certain he could adapt to. He jacked in, jamming his access plug into the alien socket. The clone went rigid in response, eyes shimmering gold for several seconds. "Echo! Echo!" Rex said, snapping his fingers in front of the clone. As if in response, the weapon lit up, a soft keening filling the air around it. Echo blinked. "Yeah, okay, I think that will do it," he said. Rex wasted no time, taking the weapon and peeking out from behind their cover. He squeezed the trigger, and was blinded and shocked as the large Imperial gun poured out a beam of horrid light, silently roasting several Imperials before it veered up and away until the clone released the trigger. Rex ducked, slamming his back next to Echo, panting hard. "Damn good work, soldier," he said, slapping the cyborg's shoulder. Echo grinned in spite of himself, feeling an unexpected surge. He had not pulled the trigger, but had turned the weapon back against its masters. Maybe the damn plug arm wasn't so bad after all. "Now," Rex added, "how many more times do you think you can do that?" Ahsoka hated this. She leaned back, the tentacles of her Montrals sore and thrumming as a lance of etheric death burned the air near her head. In response, she thrust her hands forward, pushing with all her might. The clinking, clanking ranks of the droid men rippled in reaction, but unlike the last time, the disruption only halted their advance for a handful of seconds and no more. Their feet gripped the floor panels either magnetically or by the function of clamps, drills, and other devices. In spite of that, she seized the moment, tossing out her longer lightsaber, defending herself with her Shoto saber while her mind guided the thrown weapon through the ranks of the enemy. The cutting, scything blade of her lightsaber went through half of their densely clustered lines like a honed edge through wheat. The other droidman, however, ducked down just beneath the cutting line of the weapon, honing in on its returning trajectory and opening fire. She felt ice drop into her veins for just a moment, dashing to the left as volleys of lethality which broke the ship around them chased after her. Ahsoka was not even truly fast enough to avoid them, her precognitive abilities combining with a clever application of telepathy in order to save her for the seconds Rex and his clones needed to recover and mount an effective counterstrike. Ahsoka's clothes were smoking by the end of it, and she could feel new burns and odd injuries forming around her, the results of glancing shots and direct hits she had softened with the Force. She hated this. Ahsoka Tano, former Jedi of the Republic, felt a sensation channeling itself into her, sickening her like a bitter poison. She knew this feeling all too well, and she hated it with every fiber of her being. It was not the sensation of personal combat, of her arms and legs burning, her skin alight with the heat of her superior movements as the Force flared in her, pushed her every living cell to its limit and far beyond. It was not the air of hellish battle, the sense and smell of dying men all around her. The luminous blade she swore to the protection of others, only able to defend herself. Each time she would break to defend her men, the Imperials would notice, punishing the effort intentionally. The Republic had already taken horrendous losses, even as the droid men of the Empire voicelessly suffered their own, eating death without apparent complaint as they dealt it back in spades. And, oddly enough, what she hated was not the looming specter of death, the dancing, cavorting form of the priest. He had been cautious, engaging her and then breaking off, jumping behind lines of his men before leaping back to attack from a new angle. Each new offensive was bolder and bolder, and now, as he leapt in for his latest assault, Ahsoka had the sense that the priest would try for something decisive. He was faster than her, and stronger as well, his body unnaturally augmented, giving his movements the consistent speed of lightning strikes and his blows the force of a boarding ram. His sparking, crackling staff illuminated the darkness, killing all it struck, tossing clones aside with metal-shattering force. Just one well-placed strike would be all it would take to end her, and Ahsoka knew it well. Yet she kept pace, dodging, evading, her precognition keeping her one step ahead, while her temporary touches of telepathy gave her the edge she needed to attack back. This was her true power, how the Jedi could defeat stronger opponents, both in the time of the Sith and in the present now. The Force was not her tool, it was her ally, and to it, barriers of mind, body, and time were illusions and nothing more. By that grace, she did not fear for her life as she spun in the air like a top, the priest imitating her in the opposite direction, both exchanging a dozen sparking blows over the course of less than a second. They landed, Ahsoka poised, crouching, Shoto held offensively, offhand open as her wayward saber suddenly returned to her. The priest stood opposite her, standing on one foot, stave out before him. He smiled, exulting in the struggle, and she could not help but smirk back, her body pulsing with the beat of battle. No, What she hated about all this was not the fight, not even the reality that only one could walk away from this exchange, if either of them did at all. The bitter taste stung her again. The sense that this was orchestrated, that she was, even now, playing into something larger and unseen. Unseen by her, and by the man before her. She had felt it so many times during the Clone Wars, and now she felt it more strongly than ever. Why? Because these people, these invaders, were not invading. At least, that was not their mindset. She tasted of their thoughts, saw horrors flashing in all. At first, hours ago, she had been shocked into near trauma by the things she had begun to see clutched tightly around the mental holds of these men. Amputations without anesthetics, radiation poisoning treated but not cured, causing deaths that lasted decades. And that was just what they did to each other. She stepped on a man, a droid man, who had fallen behind her as he had reared to strike her with a radiation-bathed blade. Even now, she was forced to fend off the gamma waves coming off the fallen warrior with the Force as she crushed his face with a stomp of her foot, killing him as he began to reach for her. His last thoughts had been of a creature. The being had been purple, beautiful and hideous all at once, with claws like some glistening jeweled crab, and a face made of both demonic and angelic components. She had reached out to the dying Imperial from his past, the last words of the horrid thing as it burnt on his blade, now cruelly mocking him in his final seconds.
"I'll get you yet!
It had shrieked.
I'll have you!"
And he had believed it. He had mistaken Ahsoka for that thing. To him, there was no difference between the demon in his memory and the warrior who dealt the killing blow. And yet, despite how she wished she could prove them wrong, Ahsoka could give them no mercy because they accepted none and they offered less. Her Shoto's blue blade flickered disturbingly, Ahsoka's eyes darting to it as she brought her main hand saber into the fore of her stance. The priest noticed and charged with a speed that blurred his form, the swing of his staff like the arc of a fan's blade. She kicked back and rolled, feeling the tendrils of icy cold reach out from the impact of the staff on the floor. Lights flickered again and went out, though no one was relying on plain sight at this point. Ahsoka hopped up, feeling a static rush as she evaded the sweeping kick that the priest had rolled into. Acting without hesitation, the Jedi began countering the attack by trying to plant her own booted foot right into the priest's blind face. But more and more, she was learning that the bloody bandages covering his eyes were more of an aesthetic than any sign of actual impairment. Still smiling, he bent impossibly, contorting back as he slid forward, his chin just clearing the heel of her kick as they sailed past each other. Ahsoka landed lightly, the priest less so. The Jedi was able to arrest her momentum with the Force, driving back in as if she weighed nothing. By contrast, the priest rebounded off the floor towards the wall, spinning like a top all the while. He kicked from the wall, and then the ceiling, bouncing back in a dizzying display of sparks. Wisps and puffs of ball lightning flickered to life and whirled around his dervishing body like guardian spirits chasing his wake. Ahsoka spun forward, becoming a brilliant corkscrew, gliding past blasts and shots of energy that could have ended her with a touch. The priest wheeled about like the blades of a fan, stave whipping out, blocking and blunting shots, while the ghosts of energy around him absorbed the rest. The two warriors met again at the center of the hallway, a blue lance of light soaring into a spinning blade of energy. Their weapons rebuffed each other in a rain of sparks and luminescence, and Ahsoka once more noticed her sabers, both of them now, flickering and fading from contact with the priest's weapon. His own stave was also smoking from the contact, but already the Jedi could see that her opponent was successfully draining her weapons of their power. He apparently knew this as well and pressed the attack, waving his stave wildly. Every swing leading into the next, his dance of death becoming a truly impressive model of efficiency and momentum. She would have admired it had she not been busy surviving it, which was no lean feat. Ahsoka was forced to dodge him more often than not to preserve her lightsabers, and openings appeared only rarely in the cartwheeling form of the priest. She found herself kicking as often as striking with her blue blades, swiftly discovering that going on the offensive was even more dangerous than warding off his attacks. However, Ahsoka was a master duelist in a way that even the Jedi Masters of the Order could never quite capture. Her own master had been Anakin Skywalker, and she had been to the realms of Mortis and beyond. Her experience was wide, her wisdom born of failure that the Jedi avoided as opposed to conquered. This cavorting blue man was but another novel obstacle in her long road. Bit by bit, she began to fall back into an evasive strategy, slowly starting to form a better plan in her mind. As much as it seemed that they were the only two on the battlefield, that was simply not the case, and Ahsoka was not suffering tunnel vision. For minutes more, she dragged the Imperial about, defending and striking, but never dedicating to a true offensive. The tactic began to gradually tire her, and the priest could see that as well. His energy seemed endless, and when Ahsoka faltered, stumbling a step, he pressed, exploding forth with a burst of speed he had been saving for a surprise. Launching himself into the air in a head-over-heels spin, stave out and leading, he sang the litanies of silence in loud fervor as the blow came down. The Jedi managed to leap back and away, the priest's weapon slamming into and denting the metal floor plates with a resounding clang. He nearly spun after her in pursuit, but he suddenly stalled as he was faced with a three-tiered, fully manned clone firing line. She landed behind them, and they opened fire. Ahsoka watched as the insane priest spun off in another direction, swiping what he could away from himself, the ghostly wisps of ball lightning fading to the last as they absorbed the rest of the attacks. The Imperial landed in the midst of his remaining forces, a cluster of Imperial soldiers who stood, guns out and forming a semicircle against one of the walls. The clones were raining death onto them, and the droid men clustered together, using their bodies to shield the priest. The Jedi was only mildly shocked to see Rex and the others hefting and using the Imperial's own weapons. The 501st were no strangers to that tactic, especially those who fought on Umbara and other extremely alien battlefields. In the end, weapons were weapons, as long as you could fire them. "Hold!" she ordered loudly, and the clones did so, closing in around the surviving Imperials, offering no escape. Ahsoka looked around. Mounds of the dead lay all about them, and it was clear to her that, despite having had the numbers advantage in the fight, it would not have been enough to carry the day on its own. She had Rex and the clever tactics of the clones to thank for that. Just like Jango before them, they were naturally given to using a variety of weapons, though she could see signs that not all who had taken up an Imperial weapon had met with a better fate. The smoking, skeletal remains of several clones who had been attempting to man some kind of heavier weapon attested grimly to that. She had noticed the reversal in the flow of battle far before her opponent had. Thus, Ahsoka had not pursued him with the intention of killing, but simply holding him, minimizing the danger to herself as her clone troopers formed up. The remaining droidmen were no longer firing, standing in a double-ringed circle around their priest, hands out wide, using themselves as human shields for the man at their center. Ahsoka stepped forward, deactivating her flickering sabers. "Surrender! The battle is lost! You will be treated fairly as prisoners of war, but you must surrender," she said to them. The droidmen did not flinch, falter, or show any outward signs of fear. She could feel it, they were ready to die. The priest, however, scowled, his face a mask of self-loathing. He blamed himself, Ahsoka would realize. He mourned his failure and the loss of his faithful. The Jedi grit her teeth. This was what the dark side wanted, what the Sith wanted. War, death without quarter or mercy or negotiation. How could she wage war on the dark side and its hidden hands when war was all that gave it strength? It had to stop, somewhere. We are not monsters. We could kill you all here and now and it would be easier. This does not need to be a slaughter. There can still be honor between foes. Surrender! Please surrender! She almost begged them. The priest oriented his head towards her, almost seeming to consider the offer, though there was a resignation in his features that told Ahsoka that, in his mind, this was simply not an option. that the more tempting she made it, the less of an option it was. He opened his mouth to refuse her, but Ahsoka, knowing too well what would come after, preempted him. "Rex, set blasters to stun and take them," she ordered. The clones obeyed her instantly, loosing wide rings of stunning energy which caught and dropped the droidmen in waves. Still, their meat shield served its purpose, and bought the priest time to leap out from the crossfire before it could reach him. He spun, howling in fury, bounding off the ceiling and towards Ahsoka. The attack was futile, however, as he could not avoid the many wide rings which walled off the approach to her. He fell towards her in a tumble, Ahsoka spinning on her heel and kicking the Electro Priest firmly in the jaw, using his own considerable momentum to knock the augmented man unconscious and sending him sprawling. Ahsoka lowered her leg and looked around the room, seeing the other droidmen going down, some taking multiple shots before becoming inert. "Bind them, and for the droidmen, have the medics disconnect their arms and legs if they are artificial. We don't know how much of themselves they've turned into weapons, but we don't want any nasty surprises. Be quick with the stun blast, but don't kill any of them," Ahsoka said to Rex. "Right, Commander," he said, issuing orders to do as she had instructed to his men. Meanwhile, Ahsoka strode up to where the priest lay, activating her main hand lightsaber and snipping off the cord which connected his power-draining stave to the cybernetics embedded into his back and waist. The hum of the staff died, and she cautiously kicked it away. Soon, the priest was bound, the advance team reporting back that the bridge was vacant and now under their control, and Echo was sent ahead on his way to search the bridge systems for the bomb's control program. Not all was going well, however, and the medics were finding it hard to disable just the limbs of the droidmen, all of which had been replaced by various lethal cybernetics. When confronted with the issue, Ahsoka sighed heavily and handed over her Shoto to the leading combat medic. Face drawn, she warned him. "Take this and use it when you have no choice. But be careful. I just want them helpless, not to cripple them further. Make sure you don't damage them so badly we can't replace their cybernetics with our own. This is meant to be mercy, trooper, not a dissection." Having gotten his word to obey, she turned to the waking Imperial priest. Rex stood nearby, eyeing the dangerous man with obvious distrust and apprehension. Ahsoka knew how he felt, but she was dedicated to not falling to their level, at least not as much as she could help it. She flinched as she heard her Shoto activate behind her, and began to speak. "I'm going to escort this one back to one of the boarding pods. I'd like to ship him out to Coruscant with some of our own ahead of anything else," she said. Rex nodded slowly. He is one of their leaders. I can see why you would want that. "Want me to come with you?" he asked. Ahsoka thought for a moment, but shook her head. "I'll meet you back on the bridge once I'm done with this. Keep me updated," she said, walking towards the man, 8 troopers forming up on her right and left. The blue-skinned priest was sitting against the wall, hands bound by several binder cuffs behind his back. Sightlessly, he glared in her vague direction, grinding his teeth audibly. "Come on, you," she said to him. The man ignored her, simply grinding his teeth louder. Ahsoka sighed and looked to the trooper to her right, raising her eyebrows twice and gesturing towards the priest with her chin. In response, 2 clones walked forward, taking either side of the Imperial and hoisting him up to his feet by his arms. Ahsoka watched and was glad to see that he chose to stand on his own, grateful that they would not have to carry him all the way back to the pod. "All right, let's go," she said. Current 82 Velen hated this. His electro-leash stave had been discarded, likely destroyed by the blasphemers, and his Skitarii guard had been taken prisoner, an offense for which few higher shames could exist. And he was the fool at fault for it all. He had been pulled between doctrines, and alas, his hesitation had cost them everything. He was a proud Fulgurite priest of the motive force, and it was his sacred duty, above all things, to waste not the gifts of the Omnissiah, the machine god, and above even them, the life-giving motive force itself. Nothing moved that was not willed to movement by the divinity and grace of the motive force, and to kill its animations, even when in the forms of daemons or xenos, was nearly heretical. That was why he tore the life from them, preserving as much as possible and giving them blessed deaths, returning their animating energies to places better suited to serve the will of the Trinity. Yet he had pursued the Xenos Witchling with such fervor that he had been rendered blind to the evolving situation around him. The enemy Replica had begun to loot the honored dead, somehow taking up the weapons of the fallen Skitarii and turning them against his own forces. This, combined with their frustratingly competent combat doctrines and their higher numbers, had ensured his loss, and the Witchling had played to it, fighting a defensive battle until his forces were so badly outnumbered that all she need do was hide behind her stolen guns. But it would not have been so had it not been for his blindness. Too narrow was his view, and now he paid a price he had never imagined he'd ever have to face. He was chained, his hands cuffed behind his back, marching between a formation of 4 Replicae, the Jedi walking before him. But C-82 was far from helpless. Just as his short-sightedness had been his undoing, so would their ignorance be theirs. While his stave was severed, his body retained the reaped energies he had harvested from the battle beforehand, and he was brimming with it even now. C-82 was a living weapon, and the key to his salvation would be dependent on knowing when and where to trigger his power. For the moment, he had to wait, traveling as their prisoner back down the ragged hallways of the ship. Far too many of the Replicae lingered nearby. Any sounds of combat would draw them quickly, and without further war gear, his capacity and variety of deadly applications of energy were greatly limited. He had to wait until he was sure help would not come, or not come in time. "Can you speak?" asked the Witchling. C-82 would not have believed she was speaking to him, but she was clearly speaking Low Gothic, or some variant. It was highly accented, but no more than that spoken on Lyrak or Treason's Folly, he considered. On the one hand, it could be seen as a sinful waste of energy, no matter how small, to converse with a Xenos. However, this was certainly a night of Jedi, and being that it was, the potential to gain intel was massive. Oftentimes, interrogators let slip more than they had intended their enemy to know, always suspecting that their prisoners would remain prisoners indefinitely. "I can," he said cautiously. "Then tell me something," she said without missing a beat. "Are you actually a human?" The question was amusing. After a brief shock at the audacity of it, C-82 mused that, from an exterior point of view, especially one coming from a region where humans existed largely as clones, that the divergences in his appearance from the baseline of humanity could be extreme enough to warrant scrutiny. "I am, but I will not answer your questions unless you answer mine as well," he said. Ahsoka shrugged in response. "Ask whatever you like," she said almost dismissively. "How many Jedi are within the Republic?" asked C-82. Ahsoka laughed at the question and shrugged again. "Somewhere between 1,000 and 1,000,000, she said. He memorized that, monitoring her electrostatic field with his senses, and, so far as he could tell, detecting no changes that signaled that she was lying to him. The data was vague and dubious, but it was a start. He said nothing after that, waiting for her, and the alien seemed shocked that he had not complained about his answer. "Are you an actual religious priest?" she asked next. "I am," he responded. "Who do the Jedi serve?" he asked right back. Ahsoka put her hands behind her head as she considered this, looking up at the passing ceiling lights for a time before answering. "Well, I guess there are 2 answers to that. The answer that is true, and the answer that is real," she said. "Explain," he demanded. Ahsoka sighed, taking a moment to organize her thoughts. "Well, the true answer is that the Jedi Order acts to serve the will of the Force. The Force is like a sentient energy field that moves through us, between us, and gives all things that breathe life," she started to say. "Yes, the warp. We understand that you believe this already. But what is the real answer?" C-82 cut in. He was less than interested in humoring her blasphemous beliefs. All he needed was to know what was true. From the way she spoke, she sounded as if she meant that the Jedi should serve the will of the Warp. But who did they really serve in its place? Well, the real answer is that the Jedi serve the Republic, the Supreme Chancellor more precisely. "Commander, do you really think it's wise to tell him so much?" asked one of the troopers beside her. She shrugged at him, evidently unconcerned. "I don't think I've told him anything you can't find on the HoloNet already. Besides, we'd all benefit from understanding each other a bit better," she said. That seemed to placate the replique, and a moment later the witchling continued. "So, what are you a priest of?" she asked. "I am a priest of the Fulgurite Order of the Divine Motive Force," said C-82. "Where is your capital located?" He started to ask. Wait, Ahsoka said, cutting him off and turning around, now walking backwards as she looked at him. "You haven't answered my question yet," she said, crossing her arms. "I did," the priest said. "You said you are a priest of the Fulgurite Order of the Divine Motive Force, correct?" she asked him. He nodded his head in response. Was this Xenos an imbecile? Could she not hear the answer she had just spoken? She shrugged and frowned, seemingly extremely unimpressed with his answer. "You may as well have said you are the priest of the Dancing Order of the Divine Nonsense, because none of those words meant anything to me. What in the galaxy is the motive force? Why is there an order for it? And does any of that have anything to do with why you are blue?" she said, turning back around with a sigh. "Well, whatever. Ask your question, I suppose," she mumbled a moment later. C-82 remained silent for a moment. He knew he should just press on, just ask his question and continue to chip away intel from her responses. He knew that if he even began the fruitless task of explaining his beliefs to a Xenos witchling, he would spend the rest of their time speaking and hearing little or nothing. He knew this. He knew this! And yet...
"To understand, witchling, you must listen and listen closely. I shall not repeat myself. I shall not tolerate interruption, and I will not stomach blasphemy. Do you understand?"
he said through clenched teeth. She spun back to face him, to his surprise, arms less tightly crossed as she raised an eyebrow in his direction, walking backwards once more. "Fine," she said. "You have my full attention, imp." Gnashing his teeth, C-82 took in a deep breath and began to speak.
"In the beginning of all things, at the start of all worlds, there was but one force. The motive force. And from its generosity sprang the well of all life, blessed and foul."
"So that's why you hate droids? But it couldn't have been as bad as you're describing," said Ahsoka, aghast at the last description the priest had detailed.
"Oh, but it was and worse! Worlds were shattered as mere collateral damage. Such were the inhumanities wrought by the abominations of man's hubris. From our networks, our structures which had stood to shade us from cruel reality, we were forced to tear free those most essential components, and thus free ourselves from the Armageddon we nearly unleashed once before."
She nodded, absorbing the information. "Wait, what's an Armageddon?" she asked. The priest paused and considered the question. Armageddon was a very Terran word.
"It means doomsday, the end of all things. I think the root of the word comes from a location on the Earth,"
he said. She chuckled at that, having tried and failed to suppress it.
"You find doomsday amusing, Xenos?"
C-82 asked, raising his own electude eyebrow in response. No, it's just... your homeworld's name is Dirt. I mean, is that just me misunderstanding the translation? She asked. If C-82 could blush, he would have.
It is a humble name! We are a humble people!
He said in indignant protest. Well, not you. Your adopted homeworld is Mars. What's that named after? She asked. C-82 raised his chin in pride of his distant red Oath world.
Mars was the name of an ancient and powerful war deity of the old Earth. The peoples of antiquity would look up into the sky and see a red star glowing there. They named it for their war god, believing it to be his red eye looking hungrily down upon them. In truth, it was our world,
he said. Humble people indeed, Ahsoka muttered.
Did you just mock me, Xenos?
He asked. No, not at all. So you were speaking of how mankind managed to survive that and go on without the help of your technology, she said to him.
No, not without our technology, Xeno. Our technology is an extension of us. It is as much a part of our race as our blood and bones. We cut away the cancer of abominable intelligence only, and learn to adapt our technology for use without it. We paid a great price in this transaction, but we had hoped that at the end of that long road we would find peace,
he said, voice ending on a sorrowful note. What happened? Ahsoka asked after a few moments had drifted by. Did you find it? Peace, I mean. The old priest sighed, and with it he suddenly felt so heavy. He could feel, for the first time in his entire life, the grafts in his skin, the metal, the silver, and the copper woven through his bones. He was a testament to what they had found.
No,
he said bitterly.
We found that in the grim darkness of our greatest folly, only war awaited us. Only ever war.
Ahsoka was silent then, and in that silence, the priest became aware of something, heard something. A soft chirping, an audible data stream of binaric chant. Magos, extraction attempt is imminent. Prepare for rescue. He felt his heart suddenly begin to increase in pace, tingling cascading through his many augmentations. His bones ached with the vibrations of the energy he stored even then within himself, and prepared silently to release them. His time had come. None of the 8 clones, nor Jedi who was watching him, seemed to hear or understand what the noise was, likely taking it as nothing more than static damage from some distant part of the ship. The Jedi, who had identified herself to him as Ahsoka Tano during their discussion, seemed lost in thought, still absorbing his words. She had listened patiently, and perhaps in the end he had told her more than he had intended. But C-82 was a preacher of his faith, and he could not help but spread the word of the Trinity. Few things were as important. And he had to admit, he had found what he felt to be an oddly receptive mind in her. So what came next would be a shame indeed. He prepared himself, waiting for that moment, the very instant that Ahsoka's connection to the warp would begin to warn of the incoming danger. Her chin tipped up, electrostatic field flaring as she began to prepare for action. In response, he released a heinously large discharge of power, frying the 4 clones around him, destroying the binder cuffs that held his wrists, and blowing the Jedi away in a cloud of smoke and sparks. The other clones were turning even before Ahsoka's body had crunched against the nearby wall, aiming their Republic blaster rifles and looted Imperial weapons towards him. He activated his Voltgeist power field, watching his spectral host of ball lightning rise up around him, absorbing the weapon's fire for the second and a half he needed. In that time, a new combatant slithered out from one of the maintenance shafts, its serpentine body hitting the ground heavily before lurching into rapid action. The Silax-class battle robot looked like a mix between a mythological hydra and a seething swarm of mechadendrites. The skull which housed its primary sensor nodules reared up from the swarm of serpent-like tendrils of steel, taking only a fraction of a second to process the enemies near it before lunging into them. It slithered and slipped between the firing clones, so smooth and fluid in its motions that it had already turned 2 troopers into flensed piles of meat and armor, before those which remained realized they were under attack, and by then it was too late. The harsh bark of a bolter firing answered their sudden returning fire, the battle robot evading 2 shots and eating 5 more. The Silax sustained the fire without any visible damage as it blew the clones apart like a child shooting water balloons with a dart gun. In moments, they were all, to the last, dead as the steel beneath them. C-82 deactivated his defensive field, preserving what power he had left, and eyed the slithering mass of inhuman death that now watched him from its side of the hallway 4 meters away. He felt an unease even though Witchling had been unable to menace him with fill the air, clenching his fists in reaction to it. It wasn't until Magos Letherin kicked open another maintenance hatch and rolled out himself that C-82 began to relax again. The member of the Legio Cybernetica had been the reason for C-82's final stand at the turbo lift, having bought him time to escape without the notice of the Republic. C-82 had not expected that he would still be on board, much less that he would try to rescue the Electro Priest, but he was nonetheless grateful for the assistance. The Blue Priest was, however, not happy that his rescue had been facilitated by the near-tech heresy that was the Silax battle robot. Even then, he could feel the machine regarding him with its tilted skull, calculating, predicting, thinking. But, for today, at least, it was on their side. Its master hauled himself out onto the hallway, wrestling with the control rig he wore. The device rested heavily and cumbersome over his shoulders, holding a large panel composed of uncountable keys and dials in bizarre assortments before his torso. From his waist, 2 fat, black, hose-style mechadendrites extended, each ending in large metallic clamps. He dusted himself off, grunting with the effort, before looking up in C-82's direction. "Magos Current 82!" greeted the other tech priest, speaking in a cheerful stream of binaric chant. "We are blessed by the Lord of Logic that you have survived and been returned," he said. C-82 nodded, agreeing that the Omnissiah had indeed smiled on him, and not only him, it seemed. Ahsoka Tano, smoking and crumpled against the wall, groaned softly, eyes slowly regaining their focus. The Silax oriented towards her and chittered in its own chant.
Enemy survivor located. Proceed with EXE.NOQUARTER.
Execute! The first Magos began to say.
Hold!
C-82 interjected. Letherin seemed shocked by the order, but shrugged and nodded his head.
Proceed.
Droned the Silax. Denied, said Letherin, watching with no small interest as C-82 approached the collapsed Witchling, but keeping his distance. She coughed out puffs of smoke, rising into a sitting position against the wall. Her left arm was broken in many places, but somehow she had used the warp to protect herself from the majority of his discharge. Still, as the priest kneeled in front of her, he could see that the Jedi's nervous system was in shock. And while he was loath to underestimate Psychers, he did not expect that Commander Tano had much fight left in her. As if to answer his suspicions directly, her saber flew up from the ground near them, landing in her good hand and activating. She swept it up with a pained shout, fury and defiance burning in her eyes. C-82 did not dodge, instead grasping the blade with the sparking touch of his Elect-2s, draining the energy away with his bare hand and shattering the blade. The lightsaber's energy cell burst, burning Ahsoka's hand and causing her to hiss and drop the handle. C-82 did not see with his eyes any longer, but he made an effort to orient his head towards her, seeing the flickering, unstable field of her life force before him. The currents and divine energies of the motive force were not meant to be wasted, but of the three divinities, the motive force was always the most generous. He reached forward and wrapped his hands around Ahsoka's face, holding her as if he were prepared to perform a baptism. She glared at him, good arm reaching up and seizing his bicep, but her strength was childish now, and certainly no impairment to his.
It didn't have to be like this.
Ahsoka panted through grit teeth. C-82 pressed his copper against her skin, feeling her shiver at the cold there. The priest did not wish to cause pain, not to a relatively honorable opponent. So he made sure that he had a firm grip on her, that there would be no breaks in the circuit he was forming.
I tried to make it different.
She groaned, a sheen of tears glossing the edges of her eyes.
You did,
he said to her. He didn't know precisely why, but he did believe her. She wasn't begging for her life, she was begging for peace, for a chance at peace. But hadn't he explained it to her already? Couldn't she see?
But there is only war, Ahsoka Tano. Only ever war,
he said to her, surprising himself with how heavily that statement weighed on him. She released his arm then, letting her own fall limply with a pained sigh. He could not actually see her pupils, but he knew there was no resignation there. She was only glaring at him all the harder. The unstable energy of her electrostatic field was fading. Her body was starting to go into critical shock.
If that is the will of the motive force, then do it. Prove yourself right.
The words were like a slap in the face.
The will of the motive force? The will of the motive force? Is it truly your deepest desire to strike at me as your last act, Ahsoka Tano? Here I see you with honor, and yet you tarnish that with your blasphemies,
he said. She did not relent despite her anger.
You are a priest,
she growled.
You preach one truth and act out another. You said that your largest concern is to execute the will of the Force,
she gasped angrily.
So do its will. Show me why there is only war.
He grit his teeth now, squeezing her face painfully between his hands. He'd kill her for this. He'd kill her painfully for saying such blasphemies. He relaxed his grip on her.
Ahsoka Tano,
he said, voice suddenly calm.
Why did you spare my life?
He asked.
Because I wanted peace,
she groaned, her voice losing its strength.
Why?
He asked.
Because it is the will of the sane. The reason I fight,
she said, eyelids drooping, consciousness fading.
because it is the will of the Force,
she breathed. And with those words, it all began to fall into place. The Jedi had a low, almost non-existent record of mutation. All autopsies had shown this already. Their techniques were also tame, almost entirely based on telepathy and the exertion of force. A force Ahsoka had described to him as a force which gave rise to all life. A sentient energy field which put the universe into motion. The revelation struck him, and with it a certainty of purpose, where before there had been naught but vagaries. Ahsoka Tano was right. She was right. The Jedi did not serve the warp, they were meant to serve the motive force. They were brought into conflict with himself by serving the Republic in its stead, but not she. He activated his Electus, connecting her flow of life to his own, and moved energy back through, making her body convulse, making her scream in pain as he restored her to stability.
What are you doing?
She yelled, clutching his arm again, her strength noticeably more present than before.
Doing the will of the motive force,
he said, releasing her and standing.
Your beliefs are misguided. Your blood is impure. Your republic is false,
he said, his voice implacable and harsh.
But your intentions are pure. Your image is close to our own. And the Force, the true Force, the motive force, has plans for you yet. But know this, Ahsoka Tano. The mercy I show you today is a mercy shared between the faithful and the honorable. Do not expect it to be shared beyond us. Not unless the will of the motive force is done, and it is peace. Abandon your republic, or the next time we meet, you shall face no quarter.
The blue-skinned priest turned then, walking back towards his compatriot. Ahsoka followed him with wide eyes the entire way. Lethern did as well.
By the great years, have you completely lost all your sense?
The other priest hissed to him when he came nearer.
Moral violation detected. Proceed with EXE PURGERETECNOW protocol.
Droned the hateful machine.
My logic is sound, Lethrin,
said C-82, passing them both and leading the way down the corridor. The Electro Priest knew it would only be a matter of minutes, maybe seconds, before more replicae arrived. Reluctantly, Lethrin followed, the Silax behind him.
Then explain it!
Lethrin called after him.
Execute EXE.PURETICOW
Repeated the robot in his wake.
It is simple genetics, Lethrin. This Xenos displays a powerful variety of general weaknesses expressed through excuses of honor and faith. It is quite convincing, and she is likely to retain her position following this event,
said the Blue Priest as he ran. The other two were having a great deal of trouble keeping up.
So what?
Called the other.
Execute EXE.PURETICICNOW.
The Silax started to say again.
No, denied! Shut up for a moment!
Lethrin screeched at it.
If we kill all their weakest generals at first opportunity, we will strengthen the enemy. They have an entire galaxy to pull from and no shortage of troops. By sparing certain elements, however,
said C-82. Letherin's gray face slackened from the anger that had held it before, a false understanding dawning on him.
Oh, I see. We effectively breed weakness into their command, and we can mask it as beneficence. Like reverse eugenics on a political model. Oh, I do like that current. It is deliciously insidious. I only wish I had been told ahead of time. I'm due for a cardiac reconstructing, and the excitement is hardly what the Medicaid called for.
The man called back. C-82, however, had ceased to listen the moment he was sure that the other priest had been placated. Many thoughts were opening up within his mind. This was truly a different galaxy, and certain things were becoming clear now. Chaos, the forces of insanity, had not yet reached this place, or at least not in any kind of profusion. What's more, it was clear to him now, from the human shape of the many Xenos he had already encountered, and the human natives of these worlds, that the motive force had enacted a powerful design in this galaxy. He could not yet see it all. The pieces were still coming together, but what was clear now more than ever was that things were possible in this existence that had not been possible within the previous one. And the possibilities now began to course through him like the holy energy of the motive force itself. He had been shown his sin in this battle, a sin of blindness, a sin of sightlessness, of short-sightedness. Now he began his repentance. Now he began to see. Hey there, fellow fans! This is a fan with too much time, and this time I really did not have enough time. So you'll probably notice in this video that I had to choose between getting the video out on time and doing all of the normal smaller sound effects that I try to get in. This is actually the inverse of what I had demonstrated earlier when I came back, which is basically just that if I make really long videos like this one, where they're getting around an hour long just in like the video content itself before the after talk, then it becomes extremely difficult for me to actually like edit the whole thing properly, write it and make sure that it's the way I like it, and then also voice it, edit it together, find music that I think works, and then put in all the little sound effects, because, like, believe it or not, that's a sort of meticulous thing you have to do, so it does take some time. So unfortunately this time I couldn't get it done. I actually could go in and pop in a few more right this moment. The reason I'm not is just because I think that it would be more jarring to have a video where half the video, or even not even half, like more like a quarter or a fifth of the video has some sound effects in it, and the rest doesn't, because I think that will kind of draw your attention to when they're not around. So that's why I've opted not to, because I don't think that I can cover this video with the time I have left with that. But in any case, moving on from that, let's go ahead and do the Q&A. So I'm just going to go ahead and go straight to my video. In the last one, I'm going to go to the comments. I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and I'm just going to start reading them as I get to them until we reach a time that I am satisfied for the time we've spent today. And that's about as fair as I can try to be on a thing like this without that much preparation. I thought that I would have a bit more preparation for this, but you know what? What ended up happening was just that this video, I needed a lot of editing. I didn't have to rewrite the whole thing, but I did have to edit it extensively. I don't know. Sometimes you go to write, and what you produce isn't, you know, conceptually bad. It just is full of writing errors and redundant words, and honestly, sometimes it takes me longer to do that editing than it actually takes me to to actually write the thing. But I'm sorry, I'm rambling. Let's go ahead and start looking for some of these Q&As. So let's see here. First Q&A I see here. Let me see. So, how long will the siege of the planet take? I see that we got Michael, and by the way, I know you guys hear this from every single person that goes on a microphone that reads anybody's names out on freaking anything. But yeah, I'm gonna mispronounce your names. I'm very sorry about that. It's not an insult. Don't take it as an insult. So we got, I think it's Michelle or Michael Salomon, and he's asking, how long will the siege of the planet takes? Okay, so there's a pretty good reason why I'm sinking my teeth so deeply into Axum. Because what you see here at Axum is this. Excuse me, I just finished voicing all this and editing it, so my voice is wavering. What you see at Axum is this. At Axum you have a sort of unsanctioned Republic force and a relatively tiny fraction of the Imperial force. It's sort of like taster platter. So what you're seeing happening on Axum is a microcosm of many of the battles you will see in Season 2. But in Season 2, I don't intend to go this in depth. In Season 2, what you're mostly going to see during these battles, as opposed to seeing like basically the entire battle playing out phase by phase, chunk by chunk, as you are seeing here on Axum, what you're going to see in the other battles is more like flashpoints, points of extreme interest where the battle is being decided in the moment, or where the domino that will decide the battle in the moment is getting knocked over in the now. So a big thing about Axum here is that you're going to really want to look at Axum for a lot of dynamics. And that isn't to say that, you know, you see Jedi beat Imperial Guardsmen forces on Axum, and therefore whenever you see Imperial Guard forces fight Jedi, they lose. That's not what I mean by dynamics. All I mean to say is, as you're watching the flashpoints in the future, remember that this amount of stuff, if not more, like if not much more, is occurring in the background of everything that is happening. While these flashpoints are happening, you have Jedi doing this, these guys doing that, ambitions playing out, the Inquisition moving in the shadows, the Jedi having their own internal struggles with the dark side, and even if I don't go out of my way to illustrate those things as the key points in the scene, a big reason why you're getting such an incredibly detailed breakdown of the Battle of Axum is because, one, it's small enough scale that I can do that. Because if this were a full-fledged battle between like an actual hardcore organizational slugfest between the Republic and the Imperium, well, I mean, first of all, I think we know how that would go down. But even if we want to give the Republic a hard benefit of the doubt at this stage in the war, before they've like really adapted much more to the Imperium, my overall point over who wins or who loses is simply that it takes a very long time. That it takes much longer than what you're seeing here. You know, you're going to have Titans deployed in a full slugfest. How does the Republic counter Titans? They don't have any war machines that can really do that. Well, I'll tell you how they counter Titans. They either fly capital ships down into the atmosphere like we've seen them do with Venators and try to blast them with, like, hardcore actual capital ships, which, of course, the Titans can fire back at. But what is also more likely is that you have Jedi move slowly to get in through the void shielding, or find, like, gaps in the void shielding, and do as other factions have done, and actually, as opposed to fight the Titan as a war unit, infiltrate it as an actual facility and begin disabling key components or even killing the princeps in control of it, which of course should either deactivate the Titan or send it way out of control, which would be good for the Republic in most cases in either direction. So, all of that rambling just to say, yes, I do recognize the siege of Axum, or rather the counter-invasion of Axum is taking a long time. Savor it, because you won't get a lot of battles or places like Axum from here on out. In fact, you may only ever get a full, like, you know, like almost full, rather, because I can never really make a full detailed accounting of the entire thing, but Axum is going to be one of the most fully comprehensive battles in this war you're going to be overseeing, that you get to see so many stages of. Almost every single active commander everywhere on this battle is being shown to you in some capacity, and you won't always get that in the flashpoints that are to come. And when you do get it, it will be certainly TLDR'd in a way that this battle is not. But since this is the first real full fang-in military engagement that the Jedi are launching against the Imperium, I really do want you to get a full sense of that. So that is the reason why. Let me see here, and it goes on. And by the way, all Inquisitors are all powerful? Seriously? Have you read Inquisitor? Well, okay. That's not what I mean by all Inquisitors are powerful. I mean all Inquisitors are powerful because they're organizationally powerful. Any man who can order an army of anything to shoot you on the spot more or less without question is powerful. Now, you can argue the degree of power or how powerful that is relative to other people, but it's gonna be a really freaking weird argument for me if you try to argue to me that any given Inquisitor isn't powerful. I mean, yeah, situationally, if you have an Inquisitor beaten and chained up somewhere where he can't exert his authority, then yeah, he's less powerful. But that's like how you have to keep a lion in a cage, you know? I mean, were you not doing that, it would tear you apart. Were you not keeping the Inquisitor separate from his power system, he would have you destroyed by it. So that's what I mean by all Inquisitors are powerful. I don't mean to say that all Inquisitors are statistically on the battlefield, have good stats, and can fuck you up powerful. In fact, a fair amount of Inquisitors are not like that. A fair amount of Inquisitors are, like, not desk Inquisitors per se, but are certainly less combat-oriented, more organizational, internal, like, you know, military police-oriented. But enough about that. So, moving on to the next one. Let's see here. For the Q&A, when the Sisters of Battle denied the Jedi's force power by channeling the Emperor, did the other Jedi sense it? No, they did not sense it. And as for why they didn't sense it, there's a few reasons. First of all, things have to be pretty big for the Jedi to just sense them in general. And that was really just the negation of a single force push. While it was the Emperor who did it, the Emperor could do that and sort of hold back to not give it away. And that wasn't really what was happening here. It's more the case that for the Emperor to actually exert that ability, just deny the witch, basically. You know, it's a bit more than that, but just deny the witch, more or less, in effect, on Shaak Ti. For him to exert that from across time and space, because the Emperor that you're seeing manifested there is not the Emperor that currently exists in the Milky Way galaxy, who is like some kind of caveman. The Emperor that you saw come through with Sister Rejulia in her final moments was our Emperor, the Emperor from the 40K universe. You have to remember that even if faith powers are not the same as warp powers. They intersect with warp powers. And what does the warp intersect with? Freaking everything. What is the warp? The warp is insanity, and a big part of the way that insanity manifests in the canon many times is by fucking with time and space. So the Emperor can use the psychic element of his own nature to transcend time and space and reach out to the sisters here. That being said, as I mentioned before, it's very difficult. And no, again, for the finality, it is certainly not the Emperor from the current, right now, Milky Way galaxy, which, from the context of the statements in Star Wars, you know, a long time ago in a galaxy far away, it tells you that when Star Wars is happening with all of its advanced technology, we, over here in the Milky Way galaxy, which is not the same as the Star Wars galaxy and are supposed to exist in parallel, are not, we're like in the ancient times. Maybe it's medieval times, maybe it's as far back as ancient Egypt, maybe it's as far back as caveman times. You know, a long time ago isn't very defined, but what is known is that it's in the past. That's why you hear me say time travel. I don't mean that there's going to be time travel in the narrative per se. I mean literally just for the Warhammer 40k universe people to have gone to the Star Wars universe literally dictates time travel. I mean, even if I put them in an entirely different universe where there are literally no Chaos Gods in the Milky Way universe, and it's literally our universe over there with no force powers and nothing, and there's no Emperor or anything, it still means they time traveled. It doesn't matter how you spin that. They exist in our soul system and stuff, just in an alternate fictional universe of it, and so they would still recognize the Milky Way galaxy of the Star Wars universe as their Milky Way galaxy, just extremely primitive and far back. And I guess if we put it out of the 40k universe, like lacking in Eldar and Orcs, which they'd be like, wow, that's fucking awesome, but whatever. So that aside, let me see here. Are the Space Marines recruiting either from the colonists they brought with them or former Republic citizens? Both. Both. The Skywatch, and I'll probably detail this later in a post, but the Skywatch have a very specific set of requirements they need to fill out for their recruits. And these requirements make their recruits extremely hard to source. The precise requirements I'll probably go into in the future at some point, but what you need to know is just this. The like quote-unquote librarians of the Skywatch, they have a totally different title, which is a bit more menacing perhaps than what it actually is, but they are the ones who actually pick out the recruits for the Skywatch, and they do so based on a bunch of esoteric mumbo-jumbo that they use to figure out if it's going to be a good fit for the chapter. The problem is that they're very picky-choosy, much more than other chapters, which is another reason why the Skywatch try very hard not to lose Marines and to act as a larger organization and to risk less. Because their recruitment is such that they can't really handle a sustained bleed of recruits. It would be too much for them to make up for that. They don't have the organizational capacity and help from the Imperium to make up for that, given their extremely strict requirements, which again doesn't really provide necessarily a better quality Marine, just a Marine that would be a good fit for the Skywatch. But the answer to that is both. And the reason both is because the Skywatch are always strapped for recruits, so they're going to look for them everywhere if they can get them, if they fit the requirements. Any chance that we might get some Chaos Genestealer cults or Orc Spore stowaways? I'm not going to speak on the Orcs yet. I'm still figuring if and where they fit. Again, if and where. Because the Orcs are a lot of fun, but they are also just a menace. So, let me see here. As for Chaos Genestealer cults, we will see. We will see. You already know Genestealers are hovering around somewhere in this universe, so you already know that Genestealer cults are going to be a thing. I won't really make a commitment one way or the other on Chaos Genestealer cults at this time. So, let's keep rolling it up. And I'll go ahead and do maybe 2 more at this rate, because dang, I take a lot of time with each of these. But hey, it means we get good mileage out of these Q&As. So let's keep going. Let me see here. Q&A. What if the Inquisitors... Oh, let me see here. Alright, so...
Hear me all right?
I'm sorry. The last Q&A that I read was from a guy called Richard Korn. That was easy to read. Alright, Richard Korn, there's your Q&A. Let's keep going up. Q&A is from Meister Hyperion. Are we going to see Chaos fighting the Separatists? Do you think the Republic would survive the Tyranids invading their galaxy? Okay, so... let's start with the first one. Are we going to see Chaos fighting the Separatists? Now, in general, I don't really want to give away what the people are or aren't going to be fighting. Because who knows? Maybe the Separatists will fight Chaos or whatnot. But... as you can see, Chaos doesn't really have a very strong foothold in the galaxy, nor a particularly strong incentive to start fighting the Separatists over any other particular faction. So that's kind of where I'll leave that. Do I think the Republic would survive the Tyranids invading their galaxy? I think they could, actually, but I don't think they would survive it by fighting them off, because they just couldn't do that. The Republic isn't really made for that. The thing is that in Star Wars, there's a lot of other stuff aside from hardcore weapons that is extremely advanced and technologically and they're really helped by the fact that they're like a federation of so many alien species that you can actually have alien species that are not really all that advanced in other things, but in this one thing they've made these incredible advances, and you can take that and combine it with other things that are in canon to basically, if you wanted to, just create incredibly insane technologies. And the question then is like, okay, how desperate is the Star Wars universe? Because it could be that they're down to like 10% of their habitable planets and they still turn this around if they get like a crazy photonic force generator that disrupts the hive mind or lets them control Tyranids of their own. I mean, there really is no limit to what you can do in Star Wars. And I think that one of the best examples of that would have to be the Rakghoul Plague and then the Rakghoul Cure that comes after it. Because the Rakghoul Plague is a non-microbial, but still it acts in the exact same way as any microbial infection or disease or virus, but it's not microbial, it's magical. It's a plague that is magical in nature. It's spread from one person to the other like a zombie plague is, usually through like scratching and biting, and it turns you into this horrible monster, physiologically completely fucking changes you 100% from everything down, and no matter what race you are, you turn into the exact same thing. It's like a much better version. No, not even better, because it functions as a very different function. But it's like a gene stealer plague, which like on crack, because everyone turns into a freaking pure strain gene stealer, and they do it very quickly, and they can morphologically become bigger or smaller or more intelligent, like of these quote unquote gene stealers, the Rakghouls. So it's a really insane virus, and it spreads very quickly, and it can even become airborne, quote unquote airborne, because it comes from this talisman called the Mir Talisman. And the Mir Talisman was made by the Sith Lord who was trying to conquer the universe with these armies of Rakghouls that he turned the whole universe into his slaves of the same race. He got defeated, obviously. The point is that if you're wearing the Mir Talisman and you can actually control it, then you can basically just turn people into Rakghouls on sight or more. So, especially if you're a master of the dark side. So, how did they stop that? Oh, what did the Jedi do? Did they purify the... No, the Jedi didn't do anything. I mean, the Jedi killed they killed Lord Darth Mir, or whatever the guy's name was that made the Mir Talisman. But, the person who really took care of the Rakghoul was just some unnamed scientist, or maybe even a scientist in KOTOR. I forget who it is. No, because I think that the Rakghoul Plague had already been cured by the time that KOTOR starts. It's hard to... It's not hard either. It's expensive, relatively speaking, to synthesize a cure, so poor people at the bottom of Taurus can't get it. But the plague is under control because the plague has been cured. So you're asking, okay, how has it been cured? Like I said, some scientist somewhere cured it. There might be a story for it. That would be a part of Legends that I'm not familiar with. But from what I understand, and I'm totally open to being wrong about this, but they scientifically cured the Rakghoul magic plague. Okay, so that's the kind of universe that we have, and that's not the only example of this happening, but it's one of the more dramatic examples where science, like quote-unquote science in Star Wars, can cure magic or warp abilities or stuff like that. So you see things like the Tyranids that are horrifying in the 40K galaxy, but it's almost like the 40K galaxy, even the Eldar, even some of the Necron stuff, like there are these weird rules in the 40K galaxy, like, okay, the Necrons are so advanced they can literally create a hologram of the universe and snuff out stars in it, and the actual star that it correlates to blows up. But they can't genetically augment the Tyranids to start eating each other, or create a new hive mind by causing a split, or anything like that. And it's just, that's totally fine for a Warhammer 40K. You can't have the factions invalidating each other like that. But what you do have in Star Wars is that kind of thing happen, which is a big part of the reason why the only consistent warring factions in Star Wars are like the Republic, the Mandalorians, the Jedi, and the Sith. Because they're not really predicated on any particular thing. The Sith become legions of Sith, they become singular Sith, they become one giant Sith Lord that eats planets, they become a million Sith Lords that cover planets. Same thing with the Jedi. The Jedi can become singular, the Jedi can become powerful. The light side and the dark side aren't so invalid, or like they invalidate each other. It's like holy versus unholy, and so they just keep going back and forth. The Republic was the PS Dia at one time, and I'll remind you, the Republic never became the Imperium proper, because even though the PS Dia had infiltrated all levels of the government and was basically the Republic in its entirety, it was still a Republic, and it's called itself the Galactic Republic, and it's been around for so long no matter what shape it takes. So these are the things that are like that. These are the things that are that way in Star Wars. But anything too specific or too predicated on anything that is sort of, like I said, too specific, ends up getting cured in Star Wars. And another example of that is like Emperor Vitiate and the entire Eternal Empire. Why doesn't that sustain? Why doesn't that stick around? Why doesn't that? I'll tell you why, man. Emperor Vitiate is too specific, and the methods by which he uses to seize control and keep power and perpetuate power are too specific, and they get cured. They basically get cured. I mean, heck, even the Sith basically get cured. Like, how did we beat the Sith with power? I mean, okay, I know that people don't like The Last Jedi, and I don't, I mean, not The Last Jedi, my bad, Rise of Skywalker, both of them. I don't like them very much either, but they're canon. So, how does Palpatine ultimately die? In both renditions, like if you involve the sequels or not, he destroys himself. It's not because the Jedi are more powerful than the Sith. It's because the Jedi cure the Sith. And it's like straight up, the Jedi cure the Sith by using, not to be too cheesy, but love, friendship, like I mean, at least with Luke and his father, it was like love overcomes the power of the dark side. Not even the light side, but love itself. The love between a father and his son, and the wish to see the universe become better. And then there's the rise of Skywalker, where it's just a reflection of the Sith back. That like the Jedi have created through all this amalgamation a technique by combining into Rey for a moment that is basically just a hardcore force rebuke that shoots all this power right back into the guy, and it's done, and he kills himself, and that's how the Jedi beat the Sith without ever becoming more powerful than them or even really approaching that power level. As far as what we see Palpatine do, knocking entire fleets of what is conceivably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of ships out of the sky. So yeah, there's that. So could the Republic survive a Tyranid invasion of the galaxy? I think so. It's definitely possible, but they wouldn't survive it by fighting it off. That's certainly not the form that survival would take. Moving along. Alright, I forgot this question. Oh, my bad. I'm gonna say this again. I don't know if I said it before, but Meister Hyperion, those were your questions. So now going up. Spook! Spook! Alright, let's see, Spook. Good old Spook. I forgot to put this question in the original question dump. I didn't see your original question dump. Let me see here, and it may fall under the 13th question I asked. What are the number of Primaris Marines and Firstborn Marines? All of the Marines that you see present here are Firstborn. This is happening just as Guilliman is getting the Indominus Crusade kicked up and off the ground, and he hasn't even really launched the Indominus Crusade as of that moment when all this is going down. He's still making the call to gather the forces for the Indominus Crusade. So they have not received their Primaris reinforcements. Will Primaris Marines make an appearance in Warhammer 40k versus Star Wars? Maybe, but probably not. And the reason mostly for that is I'm trying to limit the interdimensional travel from the Star Wars universe to the 40k universe, to just very specific events. And more than that, to be totally honest, because I've started making this series, it eats up a lot of the free time I would normally use reading. And so in recent times, I've begun to fall behind in the more modern Warhammer 40k canon. And because I've begun to fall behind, I am not really extremely well acquainted with the capabilities of the Primaris. I understand that they have like a brief Wolverine ability where they can regenerate really fast from certain things, but I don't know. I don't yet have a spread of data points in the very loose canon that is 40k that makes me feel very confident riding the capabilities of the Primaris, at least as of the moment of when I started this series. Also, when I actually had started writing the drafts and everything for Warhammer vs 40k, it was as 8th edition was kind of like ending and 9th edition was getting teased, and I didn't know that the Primaris were really going to be a thing like they are. I had actually imagined that Primaris was just going to be a new rollout of armor and stuff to help redraft up the proportions for Space Marines that have always been a little bit wonky. We in the Warhammer 40k community kind of are aware of and either uncomfortable or profoundly uncomfortable with the fact that our Space Marine proportions have always been a little wonky until the Primaris came along. But as for actual Primaris, to answer that question, currently there are none. All the Space Marines you see are Firstborn Space Marines. They are all that way. And for Star Wars fans listening on this, what this means is just that there are like new Space Marines that are even scarier, and there are the older Space Marines where all the legends have been made out of. We're using the older Space Marines for this. So, that was Spook. Good to have you, Spook. Let's see, some guy camping. I hope you have marshmallows. Let's see. Will there be any side stories outside the main episodes that are basically one-off short mini-stories that are a little slice of life or thoughts of a more civilian point of view of the conflict? Maybe. If I feel the urge to do such a thing or the merit in it, if I see that and I feel it, then most certainly yes. If I don't, then probably not. Another question. How many Jedi Masters have been absolutely brutalized? How many do you have left? Will you make original Masters if you run out of... Okay, so there's a lot of Jedi Masters in the canon. Like a lot. Like literally some of them are just names on, like, crossed off names on dead posters for, like, Order 66 people. But we have a lot of Jedi Masters, at least in names, if nothing else, to use. So I don't predict that I'll start running out. I do predict that I will make my own Jedi Masters because I would like to make my own characters to fit certain roles and not maybe try to force square pegs into round holes, and instead just make a character for that. The same way I did for Ren-Fi and for Gaffin. That being said, how many Jedi Masters have been absolutely brutalized? About a handful. The Imperium is extremely aware of every single Jedi that they kill, and they do take pains to bring them in, because the Imperium is extremely concerned with, well, with everything. Because the galaxy, while it's actually not as bad as the Warhammer 40k galaxy it's like if you were in the Warhammer 40k galaxy and you jumped in after a huge time skip or something, right? And you found suddenly that the galaxy was ruled by a quote-unquote republic that had an army of slave human clones. Like, If you saw that in Warhammer, it would be really grim and bad for the humans and really terrible for everyone involved. And it would just be masking a horrible, horrible thing. And so, right now, the Imperium is trying to unmask and understand the horrible, horrible thing that they have no doubt is there. And so, because of that, every time they kill a Jedi Master, they take them in, they begin experimenting on them. Well, not experimenting. They perform very detailed autopsies on their corpses. And so, what do you get out of this? Well, what they learn from this is this very quickly. Like, Ki-Adi-Mundi was not a mutant. You know, that was a thing that they thought he may be. No, he wasn't a mutant. He was an alien. It's very clear that he's an alien. That being said, he's an alien that looks really, really human and has, like, human sexual organs and human biology in a lot of places and a lot of analogous human, like, everything. So, it's just, like, a lot. Like, they're just, you know, naked. The guy looks more like a mutant than like a human, just a really symmetrical mutant. So, they keep finding this. And I'll say this. How many Jedi have been killed in the current canon? It's going to be in the realm of about, I mean, before the Battle of Axum, it's going to be in the realm of about 7. About 7 Jedi had been killed and recovered by the various forces of the Imperium. Not that much, yeah, because Axum, you have to remember that until Axum and Anaxis really fell hard, not really even Anaxis. Anaxis they drove off because they didn't want them to use the Separatist bomb to blow up the planet. It wasn't until Axum, really, that the Republic understood that they were facing a very powerful and not situationally powerful force. So, they hadn't thrown all those Jedi into the defense of Axum. But they are throwing all these Jedi into the counter-invasion, and so you're going to see things go up. As far as how many Jedi Masters of the Librarian curve stop, you're going to have to wait for the Librarian to come out and show you what he's done, right? So there you go. I'm going to do one more. I'm trying so hard not to yawn, but I have literally been up for like more than like about 24 hours trying to finish this video. So it is a tax. The long videos are very hard to get out in 1 week, you know. There's nothing to it more than that. But let me see here. Ah, Spook! There you are. There you are again. This is a very, very long one, Spook. My goodness. I would have thought this would have come before the last one. I thought these were in chronological order. Oh, whatever. Excuse me. All right. Let's see here. Quite a few questions. Let's just go for 2 maybe. Since you've confirmed that Genestealer cults will be a thing in the future, I have a few questions about them. Oh, geez. So each of these questions are fold-out questions. Will the Genestealers pop up in Imperial Holdings, Tatooine Axum, or will they pop up and you're going to have to wait to see that? I can't give that away yet. Will there be certain species who will give Genestealers an easier or harder time to... you're going to have to see that. That's part of the fun of me writing it, so you're gonna have to wait for my execution of that concept. And the question regarding Genestealers, will they lord over their own empires, similar to the Hutts and various gangs? Do they work in it? You're going to have to see the execution of that, too, because we don't actually... It's funny, because... and it could be the way that Genestealers operate is that they intentionally don't spread beyond the quote-unquote reach of the Hive fleets, but we very rarely get examples of Genestealer cults that take over a planet, and then it isn't eaten the next day or the next week or like extremely shortly after. It's like, all right, how long? What happens? How does a planet that is now officially under a Genestealer cult operate in the long term without being hiding? Because that's the other thing. Is like sometimes you see a planet that has been taken over by a Genestealer cult, and what they do is they carry on almost like normal with like a few like normal, like with a few noticeable differences, but they try to pretend, oh yeah, we're just an Imperial planet waiting to get snacked on, please go away. So it'll be interesting to see what they do if they're not like that, but you're gonna have to wait to see. Let's see here. Now on to the Dea cults that are also confirmed. Will they be created originally by the Republic's reaction to the Imperium, or will they be created artificially by missionaries? And that is going to be both plus. So most of the quote-unquote PS Dea cults that you're going to see aren't even really PS Dea cults, because the PS Dea was so long ago that they don't actually call themselves like that. Even if if they even did originate as that, because a lot of the human cults you're going to see actually have no relation to the PSDA at all. What they actually are different human supremacist movements from different planets. You know, every single planet with a large enough human population, or a population of any given species, will have supremacist movements of that species, unless they're an extremely specific kind of species. So there's lots of human supremacy in the galaxy, just because there's a lot of humans in the galaxy, but they, generally speaking, don't get a lot of traction without help, because it doesn't like provide for itself. It doesn't lead to a lot of success, because it is simply a fact that in this galaxy, most of the time, near humans are superior to humans because they're just humans plus. You know, like, how is a Twi'lek inferior to a human? Twi'leks literally just have more memory capacity. Oh, well, we enslave them a lot. Yeah, that's sort of an artificial thing, isn't it? Yeah, so there you go. But onto the thing I was trying to say is that, so where are these human supremacist factions coming from? Well, Palpatine has spent the last few decades grooming them and bringing them to power, especially in the core worlds. He's really, really emphasized this human high culture thing, and while he, as Palpatine, hasn't openly endorsed it, he secretly has, and Damask Holdings has certainly done so, which the fact that Damask Holdings is an alien organization has really allowed it to get into places and spread this ideology where it really shouldn't be spread. So, because of all this prep work that Palpatine has been doing to get the galaxy ready for his human-dominant empire, he has unwittingly sowed the seeds for the Imperium's power base. In addition, there will be converts when people see how powerful the Imperium is. They'll be like, oh, well, I guess humanity was a whole lot more than I gave it credit for. I never really thought of myself as a human over anything else, but it looks like that's a valid way of thinking all of a sudden. And there will be some that are like that. And there will also be some that are artificially created by Imperial missionaries, because you better believe that there will be Imperial missionaries. There absolutely will be. The forms and methods they take will be very unique to the Imperium, but they will certainly be there, and you will certainly see them. But you'll have to wait for the execution of those things. Will they be hunted down by the forces of the Republic, or will they simply hide away, or even be ignored by the Republic? Ha 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 ha! You'll have to wait to see, but I can tell you this, they will be very hard to ignore. Will they be unified? No, they will not. But, they will eventually get unified by the Imperium, but they are not a unified cult. Will they act as scouts for the Imperium? They will act as many, many, many different things, and you'll have to wait to see. One thing you'll be very interested in seeing, I think many people will be very interested in seeing, is watching Republic scientists who are humans, who are not suddenly like, for the Emperor and all this, who defect over to the Imperium because they think it's the way to go, because they see the galaxy moving that way, who then suddenly have to deal with either becoming tech adepts, who have a ridiculous amount of restrictions in their access to technology and their ability to research and do anything like that, or they'll have to try to convert over into the priesthood of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Conversely, it will also be very interesting for a lot of you to watch, I think, how the Adeptus Mechanicus deals with both trying to parse out which technologies are good, which technologies are bad, which compromises can be made, and how to even accept an influx of an educated population that is this massive, because the Imperium simply isn't used to having something like this. You know, like, this is the Schola Progenium is not a bad educational institution. It's also an enormous, propaganda institution that just pumps you full of Imperial propaganda, but it also does teach you how to be competent and how to do stuff. And there are parallels to that, very powerful parallels in the Mechanicum, but those institutions are not prepared to hold a load like this, and the Imperium is used to dealing with people who are a lot more gullible and a lot more desperate for their message. So it's going to be interesting to see how they try to absorb even the willing human factions who go into the Imperium like, hey, alright, we're part of the human faction now, so where's my internet and the stuff I like? And they're like, internet? What, you think there's freedom of information in this? Oh, well, no, that's not how we do. And then there's going to be a problem. So you'll see. Of course, the Empire in Star Wars had ways of dealing with it too. They weren't as extreme as the Imperium, but the point is that there are ways of dealing with it. There is going to be friction. You'll see. It'll be fun. Let me see. And I think that will be it for now, because I've gone on for quite a bit. I think this might be one of my longer after talks, aside from like when I explained my entire opinion on Star Wars and whatnot. So I will go ahead and leave it here. And if I didn't get to your Q&A, which I saw there were so many, so I know that I didn't get to them all, fact of the matter, go ahead and repost them in this video. Go ahead and leave your Q&A questions in this video. Go ahead and copy and paste the last questions if I didn't get to them. Totally fine, because next time when I go in Q&A in the next video, in the next after talk, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take it from the bottom to the top as my little analytics page here shows me, and I'm just going to read them up as I can. Some I will answer, some I will not, and hopefully that can keep being a fun thing that we do. So, I've heard your guys' voices on the idea of voting for survival, and there's a little bit of division there, but mostly you guys do seem to be very much in the mindset that it is best if I choose who survives, who lives and who dies, and you be left in the dark about that. And I'm kind of proud of you guys as a community, honestly, for that. Because that's a ballsy thing to give as a fan to the creator that I know a lot of fans normally are all too eager to try to like have some influence in. So I honestly, you know, respect. I did not expect that sort of maturity from a populace of over 100 people, and so I am very, very, very surprised and happily so with that turnout. To the people who have been asking for more influence, I'll go ahead and say this, and this will be the last question I make on this should people have a vote and should not, and how people survive and whatnot. For those of you who play Warhammer, especially the tabletop RPG and stuff like that, you'll be aware that it works on a D100 system for the RPG. D100 just means that you roll percentage dice, and the percentage you roll is what determines the outcome of what happens. So what if I did this? I put up the little selection for you guys, but instead of the person with the most votes getting protection, what if they just take that percentage? You see what I'm saying? I'll go ahead and I'll from the greatest to the least, I'll stack them in percentages, and then I roll a percentage dice and don't tell you guys who ended up getting the protection, which, funny enough, means that even the most unpopular person could get it, and that could be a thing. And again, the people I would put on this list are not like people who I have plans for, and who it would mess up my narrative for them to die or survive or whatever the case may be. They would be totally safe choices, because I'm definitely not into fucking with my story just for the shock value. This would be things that, by one method or another, I have things sort of covered. And, you know, if there was an unexpected choice, you guys like choose someone really unexpected to survive, I will go ahead and integrate their survival as a thing that adds to the narrative. Like, things will be different but added to, as opposed to being subtracted from. But that would be the sum total of the change I would allow from a decision like that to influence the what is already set in my head as what is good and going to be fun to read. So go ahead and tell me what you think of that alternative idea. And if you guys still very much in the realm of letting me choose 100% and being 100% in surprise of it, or rather, because it'd still be a surprise in this case, but not having an influence on that, then this will be the last that you hear about it, and I'll let you know in the next video how that goes down. But with that being said, I want to wish you guys a very, very happy week. Hope it all goes extremely well for you. Enjoy the time that you have with your friends, your family, your loved ones. That time is precious. So definitely cherish it, even if at times we have so much of it in the moment that we take it for granted. You know, think of someone you love, give them a call, remind them. These are the things that are important. And until next time, this has been a fan with too much time, wishing you a very good time. Take care.